Thank you, Spock. Thank you, McCoy. And let's bring him in right now. He is Jason Barker of Knights of the Storm. Jason, live long and prosper, my friend. How are you? You are looking fine. I hope you're feeling fine. Happy Thursday.
You can't go wrong with an EP Autos hat. Those are available on his website.
You got that right, man. I got mine right over here. I'll get it right over there. And as I knock the camera.
The bar.
Yeah, I got the bar. All right. This is great. We'll have to take a screen cap and send it over to Eric.
Yeah.
That'll be cool. Well, we'll do the live long and prosper. There we go. Hey, man, thanks for coming on, and I really appreciate it. You know, it's a tumultuous time period almost all the time in anybody's life for various circumstances, but especially with the political forces arrayed against us and our freedoms. And so it often, I think, especially since COVID, has gotten people to start thinking spiritually and about the Bible. As you know, on Thursdays, I want to do this, and I turned to you a couple weeks ago and mentioned this, and you were enthusiastic because I said, I'm interested in hearing people's favorite books of the Bible. So thanks for coming on to talk about this, man. And I just sort of lay it out for you when you heard me ask this question, how you responded and what your thoughts were.
Yeah. So just for those listening, as you mentioned, Guard had asked me a couple weeks ago, do you want to come on and talk about your favorite book of the Bible? And that's a tough one for me. I'm not going to pull a Trump and say, oh, it's all pretty good because, but no, there's two books that I said there's two that go hand in hand. The book of Job, number one, because that talks about adversity. And I hear a lot lately, a lot of people saying that they're kind of atheistic or whatever, will say, if God's real, why does he let bad things happen to good people? And right now, ever since COVID and even before then, but now even more so with inflation and stuff like that, people are struggling and they're like, why would God allow this to happen? Well, go back and read the book of Job. And then on the flip side of that, the second book that would be my most favorite, probably my actual most favorite, is the book of John, which is the book of love by one of the apostles. And it basically, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, those books are all basically the same story from a different perspective. And John was the one from love. So if we take a look at the book of Job, and this is why I really like this book, even though it seems kind of morbid, Job was a man who in God's eyes was a righteous man. And there was some kind of conversation that happened. I'm paraphrasing all of this, of course, where Satan had told God that he can get people to turn against him. And God says, hey, have you considered my servant Job, who's a righteous man? And so it was kind of a bet, if you will. And it seems kind of horrible that he would allow this to happen, that God would allow it to happen. But a lot of bad things happened to Job. And I know we have a limited amount of time, so I won't get into the whole book, but Job was a wealthy man. He had a big family, a wife. He had a lot of land. Think of him as like a large plantation owner.
Sure.
That was a person of influence and power and stuff like that. Yeah. But he was also a righteous man. So he was not like an evil person.
Right.
And throughout all of these challenges he loses his children, he loses his wife, he loses his property, he loses his servants, he loses everything. He winds up at the end of the day, and at one point his wife even said, she got so fed up with it, she said, why don't you just curse God so he can kill you and get this over with? That's how much this just man that was just in God's eyes, that was an admirable man in God's eyes, was allowed to go through. And he refused to curse God. And at the end of the day, he winds up on a pile of dung. He had some friends come by, to try and comfort him, and they didn't even recognize him. And they couldn't even look upon him because he was in such a poor state. But he was fully restored by the end of the day because he refused to curse God. So, I'm not a perfect person. You're not a perfect person. None of us are perfect people.
Yeah, compared to Job, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the point. The point is that if Job was able to go through that, and it's a battle every day. I have my struggles. I have my issues. I have my vices. I have a bad temper sometimes. these are things we work on and work on. And if you could see that somebody else who was way better of a person than I ever will be, was able to go through that and persevere in the end, we can do it too. And it's just, and that's where the second half is the book of John, where if you go through the book of John and read it, that's where you see God's loving hand, right? And everyone knows John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world. I have it up here to read, so I'll read it verbatim out of the King James. For God so loved the world that whosoever believeth on him should not perish but have everlasting life. But people don't read the second part of that. For God sent not his son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So that's where we got to go. We have to look at, we're not the only ones being hurt here or being challenged, or the obstacles we have to overcome. And also I want to throw one more thing in there. I'm not trying to run too long, Guard. I know it's going to.
This is great. This is great. This is awesome. Take your time.
I'm huge into making knives and bladesmithing. I don't actually do it. I mean, I've made some knives when I was a kid, but that show Forged in Fire. I think we may have talked about this before.
Yeah.
In order to make a functional weapon, you've got to take a piece of steel that really doesn't do anything. You got to heat it up. You got to beat the heck out of it. You got to heat it up again, beat the heck out of it. You got to heat it up again, beat the heck out of it, get it into shape, into the proper shape. Then you quench it, right? And then there's a tempering process. Right. So it's not too brittle and it won't break. And then it becomes a functional weapon. And I really feel like if we take a look at Job and the struggles he went through, and the one thing I do struggle with that book is that he lost his kids, they died and stuff like that. That kind of sucks for them, but we don't know what the relationship between those children and God were. So that may have been in the cards already. This is a story about Job and his struggles and not cursing God, not turning away. And then at the end of the day, there was redemption for him, or restoration for him, which is then reflected for all of us in the book of John. We can become like a functional tool or weapon for God to use. And I really, weapon's not the right word. It's more like a tool, I guess you can say. But we have to go through this process, because without sorrow, there is no joy. Without day, there is no light. Or I'm sorry, without night, there is no day. Right. But so everything has to be looked at in that manner. And I think it's an important message today, because a lot of people are struggling. A lot of people went through the ringer over COVID. They're going through the ringer over their debt, their mortgage payments. Maybe they got the car repossessed or whatever. Stick with it, and just know that at the end of the day, we're going to make it. We're going to make it to the end. Do not be frustrated with it, too much or whatever. But that was my two favorite books right there, and they go hand in hand.
Well, it's interesting that you should pick the book of Job and talk about that first off, Jason, because as I've mentioned a couple times before, when I was maybe 20 or so, my dad gave me a copy of Candide by Voltaire. And the story of Candide is sort of similar. It's like a French 18th century take on Job, but from a guy who's more of a skeptic, Voltaire. And Voltaire has a character who's a cipher of the Christian philosopher Leibniz, the German philosopher at the time. And Leibniz was famous for saying, everything that happens in this world, as bad as people might think it is, and we can't explain why bad things happen. Why does the child get run over by the wagon? We don't know. But everything that happens in this world has to be for the best, because God created this world, and God created the best of all possible worlds for us. And so Candide is this character who lives high on the hog on this manor in France, and he's having an affair with the daughter of the Duke, and he gets caught in the hedgerows with her. and he's thrown off the manor. And he had been very wealthy. He loses everything. He's conscripted into the Algerian army, whipped to almost a minute of his life, falls off a boat, gets some riches, loses them again. All these terrible things happen. And he had been a subscriber on the manor to a visiting doctor, philosopher, who was a cipher of Leibniz called Dr. Pangloss, which is where the term Panglossian worldview, like rose-colored glasses, comes from. And Pangloss would recite that line as if it were his own. Everything that happens for this world is for the best because God created this, the best of all possible worlds. And so Candide originally subscribed to it. By the end of the story, he's reunited with the woman he loves and with Dr. Pangloss. They're in northern Africa, somewhere near Algeria, and they're trying to grow onions in this really arid soil. They have one shade tree, and they're trying to drink some water at lunch, and they're under the shade of the tree. And Dr. Pangloss is like, this is great. Look at this. This is fantastic. And Candy's like, what are you talking about? He goes, you know, if you hadn't been thrown off the manor, if you hadn't been whipped to nearly a moment of your life and lost all your jewels and all the gold and everything like that, right, we wouldn't be together here now, you know, having this glass of water. And Candide's like, you know, they're barely surviving trying to grow some onions, right? Yeah. So he's like, I got to get back to work. So he has the realist view of this is the material world and we got to survive here. Now, I don't know exactly, and I have to look some more up as to whether or not Voltaire was actually teaching us a lesson where he actually did support that. But when I read it the first time, I agreed with Candide. Like, hey, let's get real, dude. Come on. Don't be so frothy here. We got to work. Let's go. You know, maybe it was because I worked in the fields at a farm stand. I don't know. Right. But yeah. But then later, after my father passed away, I reread it and I realized that Pangloss was right. And the other aspect of it is, it shouldn't even have to do with whether you're getting some satisfaction in the moment and reflecting on, I'm getting a reprieve almost in a Sisyphean way, like Sisyphus. Now I'm going down the hill and I can breathe and I'm no longer pushing that rock up the hill. I have a moment of respite where we're under the tree. It shouldn't even be that material comfort that you're feeling. But, you know, by nature, we are people who feel these things and we can't help but want to not feel pain. And when we get relief, we say, oh, thank God, you know, I've been given relief. What it's really about is the soul. And that's what Job is about.
Yes.
And even if Job had not been made whole in his life, the future that we can't see with our own eyes is the soul. And Job would have been made whole then. And that's what's so difficult, I think, for people to understand when they're going through tough times, even if you're not getting the satisfaction that maybe Job was given and granted in the end, because he still had the pain of losing his children. But even if we're not given that, in the end, it's about the soul. And that is the key. It's so important to remember that, I think.
Yeah. And when we are here in this realm, you know, before we pass on, because there is, you know, a finish line, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. As you mentioned, and that story that you talked about is very much like the story of Job. Yeah. A real quick, two quick things is, number one, when, you know, going back to where I started, where people, I see this a lot. Why does God let bad things happen to good people? Well, the fact is, none of us are good. Okay. If you subscribe to the Bible, none of us are good and we don't deserve anything. All right. And the other thing is, let's take a look at an affluent person. We see this a lot with celebrities and their children. They're raised on drinking $100 bottles of wine and, you know, all the best food and blah, blah, blah. So if you give them a cheeseburger from McDonald's, you know, and an orange soda, they're going to be like, this is garbage. But if you know, go to that point where you have nothing, that might be the awesomest meal ever for you. So you can't really appreciate, and this is where I said, you know, you can't have day without night. You can't have this without that. There has to be a comparison factor. So these struggles and these times of doing without and stuff like that make us really appreciate when we do have something. Yeah. And like you said, if we don't get it in this life, you know, try to provide that for others. Understand you're not perfect. We don't deserve anything. You know, don't come down on yourself, of course. Don't do that. try to become a better person, try to improve yourself day by day by day, which I'm continually working on. I have my flaws like anyone else, but there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. But understand that when you do these, go through these struggles and stuff like that, when times are better, you're going to really appreciate that thing. Like, I spent a lot of time in the military suffering in the field, sleeping on the dirt. I've slept on the hood of a Humvee. I've slept in the back of a Humvee, like in the seat. And if anyone's been in one of those, it's very uncomfortable. Those times were horrible. But then when I retired, the first thing that I did when I came here, my wife took me out to the river and we sat there and did absolutely nothing, watching the water. And it was the best. I mean, if I hadn't been through those struggles in life, that would be like, why are we sitting here looking at the water? What are we doing here? But it was like the absolute best. So sometimes you have to go through that to appreciate the finer things in life, like the quietness sometimes,
Yeah.
But that's all I got, Garden. And I appreciate you asking me on, because this is something that is real important to me, is for people around me to understand when bad things are happening, that's for a reason. It's either to sharpen you, like someone, I think it was Smuhaski in the chat said, iron sharpens iron, Yeah, that's true. So you're being worked on is what's happening. You're being worked on by God to strengthen you, or to teach you a lesson, or to make you appreciate something else later on. It's all working in your favor towards the end. So
and I think also, I think one's own approach to these things can act as an example for other people, which is, one of the great things to be able to have you on, Jason, because you're always an example. Whether it's on Nights of the Storm, you have your Bible quote at the beginning of the show and ask people, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? It's a great way to, have friends together like you and me, and being able to talk about these things. And maybe other people will see these as an example of somebody who went through something really tough, and yet, they pulled a Dr. Pangloss, and they said, hey, they were like Job, and they said, no, I've been blessed with life. This is awesome. It's tough. It is tough, but you never give up. And sometimes thinking that you could be an example to someone else is also a way. You don't want to try to think of, different tricks and ways to get through a tough time, but that itself can be a way that you're saying, no, you know what? I'm actually being given a reward in a way that I might be able to, I think I lost Jason, that I might be able to help someone else. We'll see whether Jason is able to come back. We shall see. In the meantime, I'm going to show you Jason's website over at X, the Foxhole. At X is his show is the Foxhole, but you can check out, of course, a lot of different things for Nights of the Storm, and go to him. He is at Real Jason Barker on X. So we'll see whether Jason comes back, and if not, I'm going to check out the Rumble chat, just see if Jason pops in, because it looks like maybe he lost his connection. But that's okay. It was great to talk to Jason nonetheless. And if he comes in the next couple of seconds while I'm burning brightly with the new color screen, we'll bring him right back on. But otherwise, thank you, everybody. And great comments from everybody here inside Rumble. Excellent thoughts, everybody. We've got Nostra says, I have a "Not Today, Satan, Not Today" t-shirt. And there's a great bit from Red Dwarf when it actually looks like Arnold Rimmer is going to die, and death comes for Arnold Rimmer. And what death does, what Arnold Rimmer does to death is really funny. And it's just, he's a character who's sort of insufferable compared to a lot of the other characters. He's sort of uptight, but you love him and you hope that he can get over all these terrible things that have happened to him in his life. And he holds these, these things, these chips on his shoulder for Arnold J. Rimmer. And so death is coming for him as he's trying to do the right thing to save these people. And in order to save these people, he has to pull something on death. And it is just wonderful. And in a way, it's like Rimmer, the uptight, officious dude, pulls through and shows that he's got a heart of gold fighting death. Awesome stuff. All right, we will return. We're gonna go back to we'll say goodbye to Jason in a manner of speaking, and we're gonna go back to our Liberty Conspiracy Mind Meld, and we'll bring Jason on again. I'd love to talk to him again.